We're just going to break into that to bring you some breaking news from the world of Hollywood, and that is that it's been reported that the actor, director and heartthrob Robert Redford has passed away at the age of 89.
Just a few days ago, Robert Redford passed away at his home in Sundance, Utah, on September 16th, 2025. His funeral was small and private, held in the mountains he loved so much, and one of the most memorable moments came when Barbra Streisand said goodbye. It wasn't a big performance or anything like that, but it was an emotional farewell that really touched everyone there. So today, we'll take a closer look at the relationship between these two legends and why this farewell is more significant than you think.
People tend to want to restrict you to a certain slot, and if they've been pleased by a performance in that slot, they just as soon have it stay there. But for me, that's for television.
To really get why these two eventually cross paths in such a big way, it helps to go back to where it all started for them, their early careers. Those years when they were still figuring things out but slowly carving out their place. Let's start with Bob, Robert Redford. He was actually born Charles Robert Redford Jr. on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica, California. It sounds glamorous now, but his upbringing was pretty grounded. His dad worked as both a milkman and later an accountant, and the family eventually settled in Van Nuys, which was a more down-to-earth suburban part of Los Angeles. Redford wasn't just a bookish or artsy kid. He was athletic too, especially on the baseball field. He was talented enough to earn a scholarship to the University of Colorado, which tells you how seriously he could have pursued that path. At the same time, though, he always had this creative side. He liked to draw and sketch, and it seems like that was a different kind of outlet for him, a way of expressing himself beyond sports. A turning point came when he lost his mom to heart disease while he was still just a teenager. That kind of loss has a way of reshaping your perspective, and for Redford, it pushed him to leave the US and spend time in Europe. He traveled around, did some painting in Paris and Florence, and basically soaked in that post-war European culture that was so inspiring to a lot of young Americans at the time.
Wait a minute, Paul! Where are you going?
Work. I have to go to work. I don't do this for a living, you know.
Can't you call them and tell them you can't come in today? Tell them you're sick.
When he came back to the States, Redford decided not to pursue art school in a traditional way, but instead leaned into performing. He moved to New York, where he began working in theater. It wasn't instant fame. He put in the grind, understudying roles in plays like Tall Story before breaking through in Neil Simon's Barefoot in the Park, where he starred opposite Elizabeth Ashley. That play about newlyweds navigating love and their eccentric apartment turned out to be a hit, and it gave Redford a reputation for being more than just a good-looking guy. He could really carry a role. After his stage success, Redford started picking up television work, the kind of gigs most young actors at the time relied on to build experience and visibility. One of the more memorable was his role in The Twilight Zone in 1962, where he played Death in the episode Nothing in the Dark. It wasn't over the top or theatrical. It was this quiet, haunting presence, and with those sharp blue eyes, he could communicate whole layers of meaning without even saying much. That ability to balance charm with gravity was something casting directors and audiences picked up on. By the late 60s, Hollywood had him on speed dial. His film debut technically came with War Hunt in 1962, a small movie that paired him with Sidney Pollack, who would become one of his lifelong collaborators. But the real hints of his depth came with Inside Daisy Clover in 1965, where he played a bisexual character opposite Natalie Wood. At a time when that was a bold choice for a mainstream actor, it showed he wasn't afraid to take risks. Then came Barefoot in the Park on screen in 1967, this time with Jane Fonda. His role as the straight-laced husband brought his Broadway breakout full circle, and the movie really played into that natural charm he carried so easily, the kind that made romantic comedies sparkle without feeling forced. And then, well, you know what's next. 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Starring alongside Paul Newman, Redford wasn't just another Hollywood newcomer anymore. He was a leading man. The film itself had this mix of humor, adventure, and tragedy, but what really made it click was the chemistry between the two actors. Their banter and camaraderie gave the story a warmth that set it apart from other westerns. The movie grossed over $100 million, which was massive for the time, and overnight, Redford became one of the defining faces of the so-called New Hollywood era. He had the good looks, sure, but also that layered presence, someone you believed could outwit lawmen, pull off a heist, and still have you rooting for him the whole way. Now, if we shift over to Barbara, you get a completely different but equally fascinating origin story. She was born April 24, 1942, in Brooklyn, New York, and her childhood was anything but easy. Her father died when she was just 15 months old, leaving her mom to raise her and her brother largely on her own while working as a school secretary. Barbara grew up in a modest apartment where money was always tight, and yet, from early on, she had this voice that couldn't be contained. She would sing in stairwells because the acoustics made her sound like she was on a stage, and even as a kid, people could tell her talent was something special. Unlike Redford, who at least took the college route before pivoting, Barbara didn't waste time with that. She skipped straight into chasing her dream. By 1960, she was performing in Greenwich Village clubs, one of the most notable being the Bonsoir. Those little venues became her training ground. She didn't look like the conventional female stars of the day, and she refused to surgically change her nose despite a lot of pressure. Instead, she leaned into her uniqueness. Her voice, big, versatile, with that blend of Broadway drama and pop accessibility did the rest. It wasn't long before people started paying real attention, and her rise began to snowball. Barbara's rise was nothing short of remarkable once she got her foot in the door. Her debut record, the Barbra Streisand album, came out in 1963 and immediately made waves. It ended up winning 3 Grammys, including Album of the Year. That meant she was standing on stage, beating out heavy hitters like the Beatles, which feels almost impossible to imagine now, given how dominant they were. But that was the thing about Barbara. Her voice and her presence cut through the noise right from the start. Broadway took notice, and in 1964, she landed the role of Fanny Brice in Funny Girl. It was a part that couldn't have been more perfect for her. The story of a scrappy, unconventional woman who fights her way to stardom. Audiences loved it, and critics did too, with Streisand earning a Tony nomination for her performance. 4 years later, when Hollywood adapted Funny Girl into a film, she carried that role onto the big screen. The movie not only showcased her acting chops, but also solidified her as a true star. She ended up winning the Oscar for Best Actress, sharing the honor in a rare tie with Katharine Hepburn. That kind of debut in film is almost unheard of, and it cemented her reputation as someone who could succeed in any medium.
Hey, how come you never go to the can? When we were in the theater, you used to go to the
It's
can.
none of your damn business when I go to the can.
Well, how come now we're married and we're cooped up here for 3 days and you never...
What also set her apart was her refusal to just stay in her lane. Streisand used her growing influence to speak out on issues she cared about, from women's rights to environmental causes. At a time when many stars were expected to stick to entertainment, she wasn't shy about making her opinions known. That made her polarizing to some, but it also made her a trailblazer, showing that female performers could be both outspoken and successful without apologizing for it. Meanwhile, Robert Redford was carving his own niche on the other side of Hollywood. He was becoming the go-to leading man for roles that mixed ruggedness with a certain thoughtfulness. You could believe him as both the charming con man and the conflicted outlaw. By the early 70s, he was already a bankable star, thanks to films like Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid and Jeremiah Johnson. He had that rare quality of seeming approachable while still being magnetic, which gave him staying power. So you had these two very different but equally unstoppable forces: Redford, with his understated charisma, and Streisand with her bold, take-no-prisoners energy, building their careers in parallel. And then came Ray Stark, the savvy producer who saw the potential in pairing them. In 1973, he brought them together for The Way We Were, a sweeping romantic drama about a fiery activist and a laid-back writer whose love story is as much about politics and ideals as it is about passion. The movie turned out to be more than just a box office success. It became a cultural touchstone. The title song alone, performed by Streisand, has lived on for decades. But beyond that, the film marked the moment when Redford and Streisand's paths truly collided, and from that collision came not only one of the great romantic films of its time, but also a friendship between the two stars that would endure long after the credits rolled.
Yeah, starting with The Way We Were, I think Sidney Pollack deserves the lion's share of the credit for that. That really was his film, and I was happy to be in it. But I was very happy to work with Barbara. I love working with Barbara. Everybody warned me before we went into it and said, "Oh God, Streisand." I said, and it ended up being one of the most enjoyable relationships I've ever had.
So, the whole thing really kicked off when Barbara, still glowing from her Oscar win and doing great with her music, came across a script by Arthur Lawrence. It was about Katie Morosky, this outspoken Jewish activist, and her relationship with Hubble Gardner, a charming, upper-class writer. Their romance gets tangled up in politics, class differences, and even the Hollywood blacklist, which, at the time, felt especially relevant with the backdrop of the Vietnam War. Barbara immediately connected with Katie. She saw a lot of herself in the character, her Brooklyn grit, her progressive ideals. But when it came to Hubble, she only pictured one guy: Robert Redford. She thought his quiet intensity in films like Downhill Racer and The Candidate was exactly the right energy. The problem was, Redford wasn't exactly jumping at the idea. He actually turned it down twice, saying he worried the role didn't have enough substance and that the story might lean too heavily on Barbara's character. He even told Sidney Pollack, whom he knew from way back, that Hubble felt more like a sidekick than a real partner. But Barbara wasn't one to give up easily. While she was filming Up the Sandbox in Africa, she kept pressing for him, sending little nudges like telegrams with "Barbara Redford" on them. At the same time, the script was getting reworked by David Rayfield and Alvin Sargent to make Hubble's character more layered and realistic. Eventually, with Sidney promising the roles would feel balanced, Redford agreed. The two finally came together on set in September 1972 at Union College in Schenectady, which stood in for their characters' college days. Barbara, at 30, was playing younger, with frizzy hair and vintage dresses, while Redford, at 36, had that effortless blonde glow. And from the very start, their chemistry was an interesting mix, different energies that somehow worked together in a way nobody could have quite predicted. Their time working together? Pure magic wrapped in creative tension, the kind that births classics. Barbara would later recall in her 2023 memoir, My Name is Barbara, that every day on set was exciting, intense, and pure joy. Their curiosity about each other never dimmed. He teased her about her Brooklyn grit and sharp wit, while she teased out his California cowboy roots, probing the quiet discipline beneath the rugged charm. That dynamic mirrored Katie and Hubble so perfectly that it bled right onto the screen, giving the romance its lived-in authenticity. They came at the craft from different angles. Barbara was the analyzer. She liked to break a scene down, rehearse until it felt seamless, almost musical, a habit honed from years on stage. Redford, meanwhile, trusted in instinct, often preferring the raw electricity of a first take. Sidney Pollack, who had to referee those approaches, later admitted that their differences were exactly what made the pairing crackle. Yet Barbara herself pushed back on the perception that she always needed endless rehearsals, writing that she thrived in the moment, listening deeply, and often delivered her strongest work in a single take. Stories from the set have become Hollywood lore. That iconic bar scene where Katie brushes Hubble's hair back? Pure improvisation from Barbara, so natural, so tender, that Pollack kept it in, and fans still swoon over it today. Between takes, Bob once whisked her away on his motorcycle to a hidden canyon, giving her a rush of adrenaline but also a feeling of unexpected safety. Wanting to share in his hobbies, she even attempted skiing after hearing him gush about it, only to tumble down a bunny slope, laughing at herself even as she battled allergies to hay and horses during filming days. And yes, there were whispers. Barbara admitted in her memoir that she found Redford very handsome, a wonderful jawline, great teeth. Insiders said she was more than a little infatuated. He, ever the consummate professional, kept their chemistry in check. Rumor has it he doubled up on athletic supporters during love scenes and once even suggested she wear a bikini instead of lingerie to keep things steamy but tasteful. What could have been messy flirtation instead became fuel, creating an on-screen intimacy that never crossed into real-life romance. Production itself had its challenges. Shooting extended into reshoots, with Malibu beaches doubling as snow-swept New York winters. Pollack later confessed he struggled to balance Redford's cool reserve with Barbara's passionate intensity, but the final cut captured exactly that friction, that magnetism, that sense of two people deeply drawn to each other, yet always a little out of sync. When The Way We Were finally hit theaters in 1973, it wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural touchstone. Audiences wept over its haunting question of whether love alone is ever enough. The film pulled in over $50 million at the box office, a massive sum at the time, won Oscars for its score and title song, and earned Barbara a Best Actress nomination. Critics were divided on the story, but united in praising the lead performances. And over the years, the film has only grown in stature, its bittersweet ending, Streisand's aching rendition of the theme song, and the palpable electricity between two megastars, cementing it as one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories. But here's where it gets really beautiful, friend. Their relationship didn't end with cut on that final scene. What could have fizzled into nothing more than Hollywood lore instead evolved into a deep, platonic bond that weathered decades. It was a friendship built not on scandal, but on mutual respect, a treasure chest of shared memories, and the occasional phone call or public reunion that reminded the world their spark hadn't been left behind with Katie and Hubble. They stayed tied through people like Sidney Pollack, who had directed them both in other projects and served as a bridge between their worlds. Bob moved into a new chapter as not just an actor, but a force for independent film, founding Sundance in 1981 and transforming it into a sanctuary for outsider voices and American storytelling. Barbara, meanwhile, turned her stardom into an empire. She became an EGOT legend, directed films like Yentl in 1983, released era-defining albums, and channeled her influence into activism for women's rights, LGBTQ equality, and gun control. Their careers diverged, but the current of connection remained steady beneath it all. Every so often, that current surfaced. At the 2002 Academy Awards, when Barbara presented Bob with his honorary Oscar, their embrace on stage was more than a ceremony. It was a time capsule bursting open, a hug that seemed to collapse 3 decades of history into one gesture. The applause roared, but for a moment it felt like only the two of them were in the room. In 2010, they sat side by side on Oprah's stage, reminiscing about the way we were. Bob spoke with unusual candor, saying Barbara's femininity drew out his masculinity, and hers was heightened by his quiet restraint, a symbiosis that explained the on-screen alchemy no critic could quite pin down. Barbara, ever the dreamer, floated sequel ideas over the years, imagining Katie and Hubble finding each other again later in life. But Bob, pragmatic to the end, gently declined, feeling that the film's bittersweet ending was perfect as it was. Still, he never shut the door on her. In interviews, he consistently praised her artistry, her discipline, and her fearlessness. And then, there were the quieter, private moments, the kind that never made headlines. In her memoir, Barbara recalls one phone call that stretched for over an hour, just 2 old friends talking politics, art, the state of the world, and their shared past. At the end, Bob signed off with a line that caught her breath. "I gotta go, Babs. I love you dearly, and I always will." For someone so famously guarded, those words were as intimate as any love scene. Their differences, which once created creative friction, became the very glue that kept the friendship alive. He was the intellectual cowboy, restrained, understated, reflective. She was the Brooklyn firebrand, sharp, emotional, unwilling to settle for silence. She joked about being allergic to his beloved horses, yet was endlessly drawn to his complexity. In her memoir, she described him as a rare combination of charisma and depth, a man who could both command the screen and vanish into stillness. And maybe that's the secret. For all the whispered rumors, the electric chemistry, the what-ifs that fans still debate, their greatest legacy wasn't the romance that never happened. It was the friendship that did. The kind of enduring bond that outlived the celluloid magic and proved, in its own quiet way, to be just as rare. As the years rolled on into their later chapters, that friendship mellowed into something even more poignant, like a fine wine that had lost none of its flavor but gained layers of nostalgia, reflection, and quiet gratitude. Bob gradually retreated to his Utah mountains after retiring from acting in 2018 with The Old Man and the Gun, dedicating himself to painting, family, and environmental conservation. Barbara, now 83, kept creating at a remarkable pace. Her 2023 memoir became a treasure trove of behind-the-scenes stories, including countless fond tales of Redford, portraying him as the thoughtful co-star who listened intently, offered surprising insights, and never lost his generosity of spirit. Their last meeting, as Barbara shared in a heartfelt Instagram tribute after his passing, was a simple lunch, an unassuming moment that spoke volumes about their bond. Over sandwiches and coffee, they talked art, life, and creativity, and decided to mail each other their first drawings, a small but profoundly sweet promise that encapsulated their enduring connection. Barbara wrote, "We were such opposites. He was from the world of horses. I was allergic to them. Yet, we kept trying to find out more about each other, just like the characters in the movie, highlighting how their real-life rapport echoed Katie and Hubble's on-screen dynamic, full of joy, curiosity, and intensity, yet untouched by heartbreak. Even in his final years, amid whispers of declining health and cherished family time with his wife Sabine Sagars, whom he married in 2009 after decades together, Bob remained the steady, quietly magnetic presence fans had admired for decades. Barbara's tribute after his passing, calling him charismatic, intelligent, intense, always interesting, read like a final verse to their long-shared song, a recognition that some bonds transcend not only time and fame, but even farewell itself. Their friendship, born of creative tension and mutual admiration, had matured into a rare, enduring connection, proving that the magic they first sparked on screen could echo for a lifetime. If this stirred up memories for you, drop a comment. What's your favorite moment from their film? Or have you ever had a friendship like theirs that defies the odds? Hit like if you're feeling the nostalgia, share with a friend who needs a little warmth, and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's hidden gems.